Welcome to Super Games Buster, where Mega Man punts and cowboy punts are basically the same thing. This time we're going to be doing things a bit differently, if only for the sake of experimentation. Now, for the most part I've had this show structured with reviews in mind, so that we can look at a game's story, gameplay, and presentation, and I can give my overall impressions on the game based on that. However, we're going to be changing the structure for the sake of critical analysis. Now what this means is that we're going to be looking at games from a technical standpoint. We're going to be looking at the facts, we're going to be analyzing said facts, and then we're going to be drawing our own conclusions based on these facts, ranging from what a game did so bad that we need to learn from it, to what a game did so well that it makes it stand out from the rest. Now, with this in mind, we need to change the way that spoilers are handled in these videos, because I can't properly analyze a game if I don't have the freedom to talk about the game in its entirety. As such, there will be spoilers, and I will be talking about them liberally. But, for the sake of making this easier, I'm going to add a little spoiler label whenever I'm talking about spoilers, so that people can choose to do whatever they want while I'm talking about them. I mean, I need to talk about them, but that doesn't mean you need to hear about them. So, if you want to mute it, if you want to skip past it, if you want to, whatever you want to do, I'm going to be putting a spoiler label, and you can choose. But basically, if you want to watch the show but you want to avoid spoilers, here you go. Now with all of that out of the way, Project Sylpheed. Project Sylpheed was released on September 28, 2006 in Japan, and July of the following year in North America, Australia, and Europe. It actually has the unique distinction of being the first Square Enix game to be released exclusively for a Microsoft console, which was an attempt by Square Enix to diversify its market. To add to the anomaly that is this game, it's not even a role-playing game. It's actually a space simulation game, which is kinda confusing coming from this company. However, despite Square Enix being the only company name that's actually visible on the cover of this game, they didn't actually develop it. They simply published it, with Seta Corporation handling the development and Game Arts overseeing the project. Why was Game Arts overseeing it? Well, because Project Sylpheed was considered a spiritual successor to Sylpheed on the Sega CD, a 3D rail shooter that was, in fact, developed by Game Arts. Now, I'm usually not a big fan of Square Enix. I don't really enjoy that many RPGs, and I've come to terms with that. When I got my hands on this game, though, I was mostly excited to be playing a Square Enix game that belonged to a genre I could actually enjoy. Everyone was constantly talking to me about how Square Enix games were amazing, and I wanted to experience that level of quality for myself. I mean, hell, the game was being advertised as the next big franchise, right up there with Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts. How are you not supposed to get excited? Needless to say, there was a lot of faith being put into this game. After all, it's a brand new intellectual property, with 3 company names attached to the game, being developed on a console that Square Enix had no prior experience with, for the sake of diversifying its market. So it goes without saying that there was a lot of risk involved with making this game. Now the question is, did that risk pay off? Let's find out. In the facts, we'll be covering the objective details of the game, which will include the story, gameplay, and presentation from as much of an unbiased standpoint as I can provide. The goal here will be to list down the details, so we can pick apart the good and the bad in the next section. With that in mind, let's tackle the story, because honestly that's going to be the biggest part. The game takes place in the 27th century, 500 some years after humanity first left Earth and colonized other planets. Throughout this time, the Terra Central government has been using the Terra Central Armed Forces, which is basically the military, to suppress any insurrection from colonized planets. However, the colonized planets want independence from Earth, so they formed the Aiden Freedom Alliance for the sake of gaining that independence. Supposedly, this solved everything, but of course, since we wouldn't have a game otherwise, it doesn't. Meanwhile, during some TCAF training exercises by the planet Lebendorf, we meet our protagonist, Katana. Katana is joined by his squad mates, Ellen and Brandon, as well as his squad leader, Raymond. They're all stationed on board a prototype spacecraft carrier known as the Acropolis, where the staff looks like they stepped right out of a Gundam series. Their training is interrupted by enemy forces, who are immediately identified as Aiden fighters. This leads to— Oh my god, Brandon! Oh my god! No, Brandon! You were so young, I just... Brandon! He was on screen for like a minute, no one cares. After Brandon's death, we meet Doris Eden, the Supreme Council Chairman of the Aiden Freedom Alliance. She publicly declares war against the Terra Central government, using some sort of government cover-up on the planet Acheron as her motivation. As a result, Katana and the others have to fight their way out of Lebendorf. However, in the process, they confront Aiden ace pilot Margus Mason, who was apparently friends with Katana and Ellen back in the Academy. Apparently he left the Academy for some reason or another, and now they're enemies. So, yeah. After escaping Lebendorf, they make it to the planet Hargentine, which apparently is where the majority of the military likes to hang out. Along the way, Raymond is injured and Katana takes over as squad leader. From there, they make plans to attack Aiden, and as such head out to the planet Acheron. However, there they discover that the government cover-up was actually the destruction of Acheron due to possible anti-government sentiments. That worked out really well, let me tell you. The plot for this game is actually really riddled with details, and it's really hard to figure out what's important to the plot and what isn't. It's also divided into multiple set pieces, so a lot of it is just padding to stretch out the game. I'm gonna try to speed through the important parts of the game for the sake of getting this review going. With that in mind... Aiden forces attack the TCAF. Katana encounters Margus and they fight. Raymond dies in the process. Katana lands on Acheron and fights Margus some more. Margus talks about how the government destroyed Acheron. The TCAF retreats and heads back to Hargentine. Aiden forces follow and attack the TCAF. Aiden reveals a super weapon. Super weapon fires on Hargentine. Lots of people die. Margus realizes that Doris is absolutely batshit insane. Remaining TCAF forces retreat to Earth. Katana and Ellen make out. Margus attacks Katana. Katana wins and Margus decides to help against the super weapon. Super weapon is getting ready to fire on Earth. TCAF attack the super weapon. Katana and Margus infiltrate the super weapon. Margus dies. Katana fights a metal butterfly that looks like the Aperoid Queen from Star Fox Assault. Super weapon explodes. Margus is a ghost. Katana survives. Katana and Ellen hug in space. The end. Just wait until the analysis. Trust me, I'm gonna be opinionated as hell there. Anyway, the gameplay is very similar to Ace Combat. It's geared towards flight simulation, action, and full 3D movement. The game is divided into missions with multi-tiered objectives, and the majority of the objectives involve destroying X number of enemies or protecting X number of allies for X amount of time. The missions can run for about 20 to 30 minutes in length, and they're usually divided into 3 separate set pieces per mission. It's all very formulaic, but there is an occasion or two where it's just one set piece instead of 3. Another thing about the gameplay is that you can equip different weapons on your ship. You can unlock weapons by buying them with credits, which you earn depending on how well you did on a mission. You can equip 1 nose weapon as well as 3 main weapons. However, you can only have 1 main weapon active at a time, although it's easy to switch weapons. It's also possible to dock with a tanker or with the Acropolis to restore armor, shields, and ammo mid-mission. And let me tell you, they'll let you know when you're out of ammo.
What are you doing, Katana? You're out of ammunition! Katana, you're running low on ammunition. Come back and resupply. Your ammunition levels are running low.
There's also special attacks that you can pull off, which require shield energy. Level 1 fires all your weapons at once, Level 2 turns you into a battering ram for half a second, and Level 3 turns you into
the Master of Bullet Time.
In addition to all the action though, there's also a lot of options for full 3D movement. You can brake, of course, and you can accelerate. But if you feel like burning some shield energy, you can also boost, and you can even cut power while boosting to ride on the inertia. There's also a U-turn maneuver as well as... oh goddammit, no.
Do a barrel roll!
The presentation consists of very detailed space backgrounds, with large 3D environments to fly in. The environments are usually rather large and are full of enemies, as well as some environmental obstacles. However, the effects and textures are rather low-res, and it gets pretty obvious the closer you get to some of the other ships. Nonetheless, the game doesn't seem to suffer from any frame rate issues, meaning everything runs smoothly despite how many things are on screen. The soundtrack is also rather thematic, with orchestral pieces and techno tracks scattered throughout. It's obviously intended to accentuate whatever's going on the screen, ranging from the tense emotional moments to the fast action scenes. In addition to the environments though, there's also the heads-up display. This is where the simulation aspect comes in, because practically every possible thing you would need to keep track of on the ship can be found on the HUD somewhere. Speed displays, ammo counters, equipped weapons, radars, lock-on cursors, you name it, it's probably there. As for the story's presentation, well, it switches from in-game cutscenes with voice acting and dialogue boxes to the usual pre-rendered cutscenes that we can expect from Square Enix games. There's also a lot of banter during missions, but it's honestly just filler, given a lot of the conversations going on don't really amount to anything. Yeah, I know, I'm supposed to be objective here, but I don't think trained pilots should be talking about how they're scared of ghosts in the middle of a life-or-death dogfight. The analysis is where we'll be taking the facts we discussed prior and talk about what parts of the game work and what parts don't. However, keep in mind that this is all subjective, and what works for me may not work for you. I'm simply going to be presenting my case, so it's up to you whether you think this analysis even holds water. With that said though, this is a really dumb story. The plot for this game is literally every single Gundam series I've ever seen. Never mind the fact that an ace pilot destroying a super weapon built by space colonies to destroy Earth is literally the ending for Gundam Wing, but they even have the ending from G Gundam where the love interests hug each other in space for no reason other than just to do it. It's not like the Gundam series can slam a copyright claim on Project Sylpheed for using incredibly tired tropes, but it's pretty telling of how uninspired the plot for the game actually is. I mean, half of these supposed plot twists can be seen coming from a mile away. The inexperienced pilot dies first? Check. The most influential admiral is actually a coward in combat? Check. The leader takes an injury and later sacrifices himself? Check. The three main characters are two rivals and a girl and they're all friends? Check. The main antagonist fighting for the colonies is actually completely crazy just because? Check. I could keep going, but I honestly don't think I need to. Just play the game and see for yourself if you don't believe me. The characters also suffer from the same problem. They're all just a bunch of cardboard cutouts that represent overused tropes. The physical character designs are pretty colorful, but they aren't really unique either, just a bunch of generic anime character designs to represent the overused tropes that are these characters. None of the characters are memorable as actual characters, which is kind of ironic, given the game's plot is very personal and character-driven. However, the voice acting for the characters is actually pretty good, with voice actors like Vic Mignogna, Kerry Walgren, and David Rasner lending their talents. The writing is, of course, absolutely cheesy and riddled with all the predictable twists and turns of a standard mecha anime, but the delivery for these lines is at least believably human.
What, me?
That's right. It's gonna be a while before I can fly again. So, I want you to command the rhinos for me.
But... do you really think I can?
On the subject of the voice acting, the presentation for the story is actually pretty good. While the writing for the characters and the details of the plot are completely unoriginal, the way the story is presented is very cinematic and paced pretty well. The music is pretty good and helps accentuate whatever is going on screen. Not to mention, the cutscenes are absolutely gorgeous for an early Xbox 360 game, although there's something weird going on with the character's hair. Of course, this is a Square Enix game, so even if they're not developing the game themselves, I imagine that they hold any developers that they work with to a certain cinematic standard. Nonetheless, it's all style and no substance, with the cutscenes and graphics looking pretty, but the characters and plot bringing nothing to the table. I will bring attention to the graphics though, because if this game has a strong point when it comes to prioritizing, it's the graphics. The highly detailed space backdrops are just absolutely beautiful, and the aesthetics for the ships, even if they scream Gundam, fit this game pretty well. However, the textures for the ships are all pretty dated, even for its time, and the particle effects don't bring much to the table either. With that being said, I think it was a good idea to sacrifice the texture quality, especially given the kind of game being made here. After all, the textures are dated, but because of this, the game doesn't suffer from any slowdown and the flow of the gameplay stays intact. I think it's actually a good example of the developers prioritizing what's important, and I think that deserves praise. The gameplay, however, has too much going for it. And what I mean by that is, the controls for the game are way too complex. Every button on the controller has more than one function, and it's incredibly hard to remember every little aspect of the controls. To make matters worse, the game tutorials don't really help, given they're about 20 minutes worth of text boxes explaining everything to you while you navigate a completely empty environment. There's nothing to help you retain this information, nothing to help engage you in the action. It's the video game equivalent of listening to a teacher drone on in monotone while having to write notes. I have never been so damn bored during a tutorial in my entire life. To make things even more confusing, the HUD keeps track of every single function you can execute with the controls, which, in theory, isn't a bad thing. After all, being able to keep track of all relevant information during a mission is good. However, with how complicated the controls are, the HUD ends up being way more cluttered than it needs to be. There are like 5,000 things to keep track of on this HUD, and I can only imagine how someone would feel if they tried to play this game without going through the tutorial. I don't... How do I do anything? Seriously, not even Ace Combat made me feel this overwhelmed. The difficulty curve is also pretty steep later on into the game. It starts off easy enough with you getting used to the controls, but soon enough you'll be taking on fighters that take way too many hits to kill, or fighters that will take you out in practically no time at all. It demands mastery of the controls, but there's too much of the controls to master. There's even the possibility of the wrong weapon loadout completely screwing you over for the rest of the mission, and that's time lost. To make matters more confusing, it seems like the game is even ashamed of this. If you fail at a mission enough times, the game will straight up give you the option to skip the mission and move on with the plot. On the one hand, I like that it lets you continue with the story if that's what you're interested in. On the other hand, it also skips the cutscenes in that specific mission, making later missions that much more confusing. It feels like their intentions were good, but their execution was sloppy. After all, if you can't beat one mission, what makes you think you can beat the one after that if the difficulty scales with the game? One last thing that deserves mentioning is a neat little detail regarding the fighters. It's a very minor thing, but depending on what weapons your fighter has equipped, the fighter's outward appearance will change to reflect the weapons equipped. This change in appearance also applies to pre-rendered cutscenes, which I'm not sure how that's even possible. Nonetheless, it adds a neat level of immersion to the game, and it makes it feel like your choices actually have some impact in the game. Of course, they don't. It's all completely superficial. But it's still neat.
Got an extra fighter?
The conclusion is simple enough. This is where we'll complement what works or try to fix what doesn't. I'm not going to rate it, I'm not going to give it a grade, I'm not going to do anything like that. I'm simply going to decide whether it needs to be fixed or whether it needs to be celebrated. Having said that, this game needs some serious fixing. There are a lot of really strange design choices in this game that make me wonder just what the hell is going on with it. The plot and characters have no substance, but the game still treats the plot like the most integral part of the game. Meanwhile, the gameplay is riddled with so much complexity and demand to master that complexity that if you suck enough at it, it just kinda takes pity on you. The HUD doesn't make things easier either with how much information it's throwing at the player. However, based on all of this, there are 4 major issues I can think of when it comes to this game, and the first 2 are the story and characters. We already know that the story is completely uninspired. I've mentioned that a couple of times now. But honestly, the tragedy of this is that it would have been very easy to turn this story into something interesting if the characters were better. The actual premise for the plot wouldn't even have to be changed. After all, there have been very interesting takes on the space opera plus political unrest formula in the past. It just needed more interesting characters that had more developed personalities, rather than the standard tropes that make everything completely predictable. Imagine how much more interesting it would have been if Doris Egan actually struggled with the fact that she killed innocent people on Hargentine. Imagine how much more compelling that would have been, rather than just having her be crazy for the sake of having a villain. Imagine if a story about freedom and independence actually had conflicting morals and viewpoints, instead of a clear villain and a clear hero. Crazy, isn't it? The closest we get to this is Katana and Marguerite's rivalry. They spend half the game fighting each other and beating their viewpoints into each other for the sake of getting the other to see that they're right. Of course, they both have legitimate reasons for fighting on each side, so it's legitimately depressing that they have to fight each other when they truly don't want to. But even this ultimately amounts to nothing, because the moment Doris is established as the villain, Marguerite almost immediately joins the TCAF to fight against her. It completely removes any compelling moral struggle in the story, cementing him as just another good guy, and just makes it all absolutely predictable from beginning to end. So yeah, the story overall would have benefited from the characters being more developed and compelling, because then the tragedy of characters like Brandon, Raymond, and Marguerite dying would have actually meant something to the player. The last 2 issues with this game are the gameplay and the HUD, which are thankfully tied to each other. Basically, the controls are too complicated, and it detracts from the experience. There are so many things to keep track of in the gameplay segments that half the struggle is remembering what does what. However, this wouldn't be a problem if the controls were trimmed down to much more manageable levels. Alternatively, the controls might be easier to master if the game scaled with them. If instead of teaching you everything in a tutorial that lasts 30 minutes, the game took the time to teach you one aspect of the controls with each mission. Maybe the first mission introduces using the nose weapon and main weapons, and the second mission introduces braking and boosting. Then the third mission introduces enemies that give you a reason to learn the U-turn and barrel rolling maneuvers, and so on and so forth. Even then, the HUD is just as much at fault as the gameplay is. There's so much information on screen I can't believe they could actually fit it all in here. It's all tied to some aspect of the fighter, and every part of the HUD functions as it should. However, there's a lot of information here that could have been omitted, if only for the sake of a more approachable presentation. How about taking out the minimap, since the lock-on already makes 3D spatial movement pretty easy? Or changing the bars that represent the range of your weapons to a simple color change of the lock-on cursor? Or removing the symbols that represent your ammo, since there's already a number counter for it, and the amount of times you're locked onto targets. Or removing the bar that represents the locked-on enemy speed? I mean, do we really need half this stuff? Project Sylpheed has the potential to be a good game, but there were a lot of design choices here that basically turned the final product into Ace Combat as a generic anime. I mean, the story's a joke, the characters are cardboard, the gameplay's too complicated, and the HUD shows way too much information. There's even some stuff that I didn't cover in this review because I forgot about it because there is so much going on with this game. However, if these things were fixed, I do think that this game has the potential to be good. As it is right now, though, it's basically an overly complicated Ace Combat with a charming but generic anime plot. Now, one thing I do like, though, is the character's name. The main character's name, Katana. Now, as a real name, that would be stupid, yeah, no. But as a nickname, that's kind of badass. It's like the nicknames in Top Gun, like, you know, Maverick, Iceman, Goose. I think Katana's an awesome name!
Katana Fairway, launching now.
Oh my god, that is his actual God-given first name. Screw it. Screw it. Screw it. This game is stupid! So hey, thanks for watching. If you like it, don't forget to like and subscribe and all that jazz. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter if you want to know what I'm doing and stuff. And if you want to see more, hit up these two annotations up here. Lastly, don't forget to leave me a comment if there's any games you want me to play, or if you prefer the review style over the critical analysis style, or vice versa. Either way, let me know in the comments. I'm really looking for some feedback about that. Until then, though, I'll see you guys later.